Great, yeah, so for the few of you I don't know, my name is Ted Harrington. I'm executive partner at Independent Security Evaluators, and we help companies defend against very sophisticated adversaries by utilizing the same mindset that they use to break systems. So we're like the good guy hackers. So what I'm going to be talking about today is we're going to actually look at some high-profile breaches and break down how they worked in order to extract some lessons. And so we always should ask ourselves the question at the beginning of any session, why is this important? What are we here to talk about? It's that the assets are becoming extremely valuable. The adversaries are very sophisticated and becoming more sophisticated. The attack vectors have modernized, and traditional defenses no longer work against them. I can't tell you how many times I hear, we use encryption. We use multi-factor authentication. And I say, well, how well does that work against the dedicated, determined internal threat? It doesn't. So that's why we need to talk about how do we actually defend against this determined adversary. So the key takeaway is Eric made the joke that a lot of times we scare people in our presentations, and that's actually, while sometimes is true, or most of the times is true, it's really not what we're trying to do. What we want to do is come away with some lessons. Well, what can we do? And one of the things I'm going to try to leave you guys with is that there are techniques that can account for these very sophisticated modern adversaries that are in fact not more expensive, but in many cases less expensive, depending on the approach that you're utilizing. So we're going to break down some attacks against some high-profile brands and go from there. So the first one we'll talk about is actually the story of how our company was founded. We were founded out of a piece of research to study the Texas Instruments DST-40. So it's an RFID protocol, and it powers two really important use cases. It powers the immobilizer function in automobile keys, and it powers the ExxonMobil Speed Pass, which is a payment platform. It's attached to your credit card. I probably don't need to articulate why a platform attached to your credit card would have significant security implications. And then, of course, the the Ford immobilizer function has ramifications that if you can defeat that, there's theft issues, there's personal safety issues. So this was a really interesting piece of technology for us to look at. This was back in 2005. We were basically 4 computer scientists in a lab in the PhD program at Johns Hopkins. And we set out to study this in addition to all those reasons because, and I am not exaggerating, it was publicly stated to be unbreakable. It's like when you're a little kid and you see a hornet's nest and you start poking it. That's pretty much what you do when you say something's unbreakable to a bunch of hackers. And so what we did was we went out, we designed a piece of research to study this system. It took us about just under 3 weeks to reverse engineer the cryptographic algorithm. A couple more weeks, we built a non-functioning prototype. And then a few weeks later, there we were proving concept by starting a Ford Taurus with a completely reverse engineered key, driving it over to an Exxon station and pumping free gas. And I have a video of that exact moment. So forgive the amateur nature of this video. These are a bunch of computer scientists.
So this is the actual key to the car. It has a DSC tag inside of it. So we can start the car with that. See if it works. So this is the actual key to the car. It has a DSC tag inside of it. So we can start the car with that. See if it works.
And now we're not going to use the key anymore.
So this is a copy of the key we made at Lowe's. It's $1.49. It's just a metal copy. See, it does nothing. Won't start the car. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use our software radio, and this is the antenna, which is connected to the software radio. Just in the back. Hold it up while we turn the key. Go.
My favorite part about that is the guy in the passenger seat is my business partner, Steve, for those of you who haven't met him. And he's got that cat ate the canary look on his face. He's like, yeah, we just did that. We just broke that unbreakable system. So that's how we started. What we've grown into since that particular attack that's starting us off today is we've grown into a company now where about 20% of our time is still that type of research where we're actually looking at issues at either a technology level or an industry level, advocating change and trying to help migrate an industry towards a more secure solution. An example of that is in the media and entertainment space. We're advocating a program about how to actually harden applications because they're becoming a key player in the development of movies. The other 80% of our time is where companies hire us and say, hey, show us how our adversary is going to get in, tell us how to harden accordingly, and that's what we do. So the next attack that we're going to talk about is a very famous one, obviously, when Target was breached, Christmas of 2013. One reason I really like talking about this particular story is we know the details, so we can actually extract some lessons from it. There have been bigger breaches since, there have been more damaging breaches since, and there have been breaches in this industry since. But of course, we don't necessarily have all those details, and the people who do have those details aren't exactly talking about them. So, nor probably will they ever. But this one was discovered by the research community, so we know it happened. And there's some really good lessons that come out of it. So, fundamentally, this is the way the attack worked. There was a vendor, a third-party vendor, who had trusted access to Target's network environment. It was a legitimate reason why they would have this access because this was the HVAC vendor whose purpose was to monitor energy consumption in the stores, make sure they were not too hot, not too cold, when the store opened, make sure they didn't the temperature didn't get to a point where it spoiled produce, and also generally make sure there weren't energy spikes and there wasn't waste going on. So there was a reason why they should have this remote access. They should not have had access to the payment environment, however. So what the attackers did was, through a spear phishing campaign, they obtained the credentials from the vendor, they got into the maintenance environment, took advantage of improperly segmented networks to hop over into the payment environment, installed a piece of malware known as a RAM scraper. Does anybody know what a RAM scraper does? Got a couple? Okay. So it's very sophisticated in that it's so dumb. All that it does is it looks for a given string of characters and copies it. And so for anyone who's ever been involved with the way that credit card transactions work, credit cards are encrypted virtually all of the time. Virtually all of the time. So there is this split second when they're decrypted at the moment of transaction, and they're essentially plain text at that time. And what this malware does is it basically says, hey, this is consistent with the number of characters I'm looking for, I'll copy it to this file. Well, now the attackers had to get it out, and what they did to actually extract the data was really interesting in that they took advantage of some protocols that allowed systems that don't talk to each other to move assets around the environment. And so mixed in with legitimate traffic, they moved these files of the stolen credit card data to areas in the environment they could then extract them. And then the attacker was able to, outside of Target's environment, come get them. So there are a few lessons there. One is, when we think about how did Target fail, or what can other organizations think about in order to better protect your assets, one is thinking about defending your assets and not just your perimeter. There's many organizations talk about, and even in the session before, there was discussion about firewalls and things like that will help keep the bad guy out, and those are all very important. But what about when the bad guy gets in? We need to think about our assets as if the adversary already has trusted access into your system. So when we think about traditional attacks and the way they work, they primarily attack three surfaces, and this is very distilled down, but let's just say there's three. There are your people, there's your physical premise, and there's your web-connected services. And so defend against that, you train your people, you put up your perimeter defenses like firewalls, and you put up your physical defenses like security guards, cameras, things like that. Well, that's not the way that modern attacks work anymore. Because in our current environment, so many systems are interconnected that all have trusted access, the attackers simply look for the weakest link, which is in many cases startups who, in the last session, a really great point was made, Chuck, that you made, that security is often considered last. And that is very, very true in the startup community. And those are the guys that the attackers go after to then leverage their trusted access to the asset. So one of the ways to defend against that is defense in depth. So building layers of defense that start from your most valued assets and emanate outwards from there. So the idea being, if your adversary is already in, how do we make it more difficult for him to get where he is now to where he needs to be, and then continue to exact damage in an extended fashion? So the next attack, I can't actually disclose the name because this comes from our consulting practice, which is protected by non-disclosure, but they are a chipset manufacturer, a very major chipset manufacturer. Most of you guys are probably their customers by what's in your pocket right now. So this customer, they came to us, and they make this really sexy, secure chipset. And they said, it's awesome, it's so secure, it's amazing, can you help us validate its security, and so before we go to market? And we said, sure, we'd love to do that. And they said, great, we need a black box penetration test. And we said, well, what are your goals? And they said, well, our goal is we want to know how easy or difficult is it for an external adversary to compromise our defenses. I said, great, that's the right goal, but black box penetration test isn't actually what you've just asked for. And so there's a mindset going on where black box penetration test equals sign good, when in fact it's the vulnerability assessment on a white box perspective that people need to be looking at. This industry is very, very, very guilty of relying on penetration testing. So let's just break down really quickly, what are some of these differences. So I mentioned the phrase black box penetration test. So there's two sides to this. There's the methodology itself, which is black box. Another major type would be white box. And this really comes down to access level. In the case of black box, the evaluating entity has no inside knowledge of how the system works. In the case of white box, they have full system knowledge, access to source code, design documentation, engineers, etc. The second half is your evaluation types, and this boils down to objective. So in the case of a penetration test, your objective is, did I or did I not get in? In the case of a vulnerability assessment, the objective is to identify all of the issues, all the vulnerabilities that exist in a system, and articulate mitigation strategies for each of them. So I always like to use a real-world analogy to sort of ground this for people. So Game of Thrones fans in here besides me? Anyone? Half the room, okay. You wouldn't believe how many rooms nobody is fans of Game of Thrones. I think maybe it's media and entertainment. We kind of have to be fans of everything, but okay, well, for those of you who haven't, you at least are familiar with the analogy of a castle. So the way that a black box penetration test would work in this very analog example would be the king of this castle wants to understand how vulnerable is he to having his adversaries come in and kill him while he's asleep in his bed. So he sends his carrier pigeon off to his cousin king a few kingdoms away, and he says, send me your best and brightest knights, see if they can get in. So those knights, they come, they spend a couple days, they come back to the king after, they say, you're good to go, you're secure. You got this shiny report. Because what we did was we looked at all your defenses. We found you have the moat, you have the alligator in the moat, you have the drawbridge, you have the archers on the turrets, you have the hot oil guys. You're really good to go. We couldn't get in. So this king feels very comfortable at night. He goes to sleep in his bed. He even tells, because he's a very benevolent king, tells his king's guard, you don't have to guard my bed tonight. Look at this shiny report I have. We're secure. I'm good. Townsfolk wake up in the morning, find the king murdered in his bed. What happened? Well, it turns out that the king has a secret egress point through the sewer system in the event that they're under siege, that he can escape because he doesn't want to starve and die with all of his people. So fundamentally, the purpose of what hackers do is they repurpose functionality for unintended consequences. So what his adversaries in this case did, said, hey, that's an egress point, but I'm going to turn it into an ingress point. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, because the knights didn't know to look in the sewer, does that mean the issue did not exist? It did not. So the king was not empowered to make a good decision. He made a terrible decision, actually, based on the security advice that he was given. He chose to weaken his defense around his own perimeter. So how would we have solved that? In the case of a white box vulnerability assessment, you'd still bring those smart knights in. You'd still identify all those same things, but you'd look at the plans. You'd engage the architects and the engineers, the people who actually work in the system, to say, okay, here's where our assets are. You'd identify all those same things very quickly. Here's the walls, here's the moat, here's the drawbridge. But someone would say, what is this access point through the sewer? And now the king's empowered to make a decision. He can still say, don't tell anybody about that, but he's empowered on how he's calculating his risk. So back to the chipset manufacturer. Now that we kind of understand the different approaches, this chipset manufacturer who had come to us and said, do a black box penetration test, and we had said no very vociferously. We went back and forth several times until ultimately we said, okay, we'll compromise. We'll start with a black box test, and then we'll do a white box. And the only reason we even agreed was so I could have the numbers that I'm about to show you so we could have a case study. So what we did was we went in, we allocated equal resources to the white box portion and the black box portion. We started with the black box test, and these were the results. On each, we spent about 2 months and 200 man-hours. We identified, ultimately, over those 2 months, 4 issues. Of those issues, 2 the customer already knew about. So we completely wasted all that time pursuing this line of thought that was irrelevant. They already knew about it. One issue was a misunderstanding of how the system worked. If you recall, when we talked about access level, black box inherently means that you don't know how the system works. We misunderstood why an input was creating an output. That left us with one legitimate new issue that the customer had not known about. So from a value perspective, 200 man-hours resulted in 1 finding and no remediation steps. Then we switched to the white box portion. Same thing, 2 months, 200 man-hours. Within the first week, we had found 10 issues. By the end of it, we had found 21 issues. And for each of those issues, we could articulate at least one, and in some cases more than one, mitigation strategy. So now the customer, for the same spend, had 21 mitigation strategies compared to 0. So the next attack we're going to talk about comes out of our research practice. Everyone's familiar with a wireless router. This started in, I want to say, it was around January or so of 2013. And one of my analysts came to us and he said, hey, over the weekend, I hacked my router, which in our company is not a weird thing to hear on a Monday morning. I hacked something this weekend. And we said, okay, well, tell us about it. And he started talking about it. And what we decided was, let's do some research around this. This is pretty cool. Everybody uses wireless routing equipment. This could be pretty compelling. So we wrote up a research proposal, and then we went out to perform this piece of research. And what we did was we went and we got the 10 most popular routers, the ones that you buy at Best Buy, the ones that Amazon recommends, the ones that every single person in this room has deployed at your house, and probably at your office, and probably at your customer enterprise as well. They're used in enterprises primarily for guest access, more so than the core enterprise function, but they do exist there. So we went out, we wanted to look at these 10, and we said if we break 3 of the 10, if we break 30%, this is going to be awesome. We're going to be very, very newsworthy. Through the course of the research, by the time we released it 3 months later in April of that year, we had expanded the scope to 13 routers, the 13 most popular routers, and actually instead of breaking 3 of them, we broke every single one. So every single one of the most popular routers, the routers that we all use, that I have deployed at my house right now, are vulnerable to local attack, remote attack, or both. So let's talk about how those work. So in this highly technical attack drawing, you have, this describes a remote attack. So you've got your remote adversary somewhere on the other side of the world attacking their victim in their home office in Southern California, because that's what our home offices look like. And all that they have to do to victimize the home office is get you to click a link. I don't need to spend a lot of time to enumerate the ways you can get a stupid person to click a link, especially because people are fundamentally stupid and like to click links. My wife now, I've trained her. Even when I send her legitimate things, she'll respond, is this legit? You didn't put a subject in here. I'm like, it's from CNN, it's okay. So clicks the link, and now the adversary has full control of the router owned by the victim. And with that control, he can manipulate all the traffic running across that router, including send the victim to other malicious sites that start automatic downloads, things like that. The other kind of attack is a local attack. So there's a different requirement in this attack in that the attacker must be on the same local network. So for us to be attacked right now, that attacker would have to be physically here, which is very significantly different from someone on the other side of the world. So that sounds like, oh, okay, well, that requirement eliminates a lot of attackers, right? That's better, right? Actually, this attack's a lot worse because this requires no user interaction. Now, that's a different topic. The user is, again, stupid. Actually, that's going to be the name of my book. People are stupid. I'm in the process of writing it. People are stupid and other security truisms. It's actually what I'm calling it. So the user is not exactly a security measure, but the point is there is a requirement for the remote attack to work. There is no requirement other than the attacker log on to public hotspot. So the way this attack works, you go to your local coffee shop, you run a tool to figure out what device is powering the hotspot, you cross-reference it with the known listing of vulnerabilities, and then you run your attack code against it. You own every single person connected to that router, send them all to your malicious sites, so on and so forth. So moral of the story, don't ever connect to public Wi-Fi. When we came out with this research, the worst case scenario that we prophesized was a router that would be a worm that would be self-replicating, send itself to other routers to continue the attack. And everyone thought we were paranoid freaks, and then it happened in March of last year. So where did the router manufacturers drop the ball, and what can we learn from this? So the router manufacturers have made a really strong effort to differentiate on feature and not on security. Actually, this blows my mind. There is not a single offering on the market to get the secure router. If you walked into Best Buy and you said, I don't care what it costs, guy in the blue shirt, give me the secure one, he wouldn't even have anywhere to point you. He'd say, well, I can give you the one with network attached storage. Would that help? Not really. And so what the manufacturers have done is they've tried to compete by adding all this functionality that is very ancillary to the core routing functionality. And so the lesson that we can take away from that is this is the way that most organizations think about security. Security and functionality roll into IT, when in fact, they should be separated. They should be completely separate disciplines. They should not share a priority. Why is that? Well, conflict is good. There are a lot of psychologists who would robustly disagree with that statement. So I should characterize. Conflict is good when it's between teams, not when it's amongst a team. So let's use an example. So elsewhere in the enterprise, this is one of the great conflicts that everyone can relate to. The idea of you've got the guy on the sales or marketing side saying, I want to spend a bunch of money going to a conference, flying to whatever, taking a customer out. And the CFO says, prove to me why that dollar spent is valuable for our company, for our customers, for our mission. And the outcome of that dialogue is a negotiation that you wind up at the best compromised result for what's best for the company. So when we think of priorities, functionality cares about things like user experience and delivering on timeline. Security cares about protecting the asset, protecting the access credentials, things like that. None of these overlap. So that conflict, when it's amongst the teams, what winds up happening, if all 6 of these belong to one person or one group, you have to rank them. And security is going to be at the bottom in almost all cases because it's the thing you can't see. So when you put it between groups, what happens now is these two teams fight each other for priorities, and neither team gets everything that they want, but you wind up with a more secure solution that still meets the customer and business objectives. So the final attack we'll talk about is Snapchat. We have any Snapchat users in here? All right, good man. I was going to pick on you. I was going to say you don't look like a teenage girl, which is who Snapchat's aimed at, but yeah, so Snapchat is certainly no darling of the security community. They, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's an ephemeral messaging service. The premise being you send a message to your buddy, a few seconds later or whatever predetermined amount of time, it disappears. There's a lot of security research that has debunked that actually works the way that they say it is, and there's plenty of ways to defeat it. So that's not actually what's interesting to me. What's interesting to me is some missteps that Snapchat has made in its development practice that I see most organizations also make. So a few years, about a little over a year ago, Snapchat themselves was also hacked. Snapchat, when they get hacked, So Snapchat was trying to roll out this feature called Add a Friend. The premise is a pretty good one from a user experience perspective in that you tell Snapchat who all your buddies are, all your friends, your contacts in your phone. Snapchat tells you who are Snapchat users, and then you just click a button to add them. So it's good for the Snapchat user. You now have more people to Snapchat with. Obviously, it's great for Snapchat. They expand their user base. So the way that it's supposed to work is you allow Snapchat access to your contacts. They cross-reference it with their servers, and they spit back to you just the people that are your contacts. However, that's not the way that Snapchat built it. They left off a thing called rate limiting. So who's had the experience where you try to log into your account, email, banking, whatever, you forget the password, you forget it again, all of a sudden, you're locked out for 24 hours. Who's had that? Everybody, right? That's called rate limiting. So the purpose of rate limiting is to allow a legitimate user who forgets his credentials to get in. I forgot once. Oh, wait, it was this other one. That's how I reorganized the characters. Now I'm back in. But it's designed to prevent an attacker with high computational power from just trying every possibility that exists. And that's exactly what happened in the Snapchat case. So what the attackers, they were actually, in this case, security researchers. What they did was they actually just uploaded a database of every single possible phone number in an area code. And a few hours later, Snapchat spit back to them all the information of all those phone numbers that were Snapchat users. And so what they were able to obtain, the attackers, they were able to obtain a few very important pieces of information that can be used in a social engineering attack. So they obtained that this person uses Snapchat, their username. Most people use similar usernames or the same username across all accounts. Their phone number, their real first name, and their real last name. So now what an attacker could do with that information is simply call you. And by just proving that they know that much information, they've pretty much authenticated that they're Snapchat. You'll probably give them whatever else they ask for. So where did Snapchat fall on this? So Snapchat chose to bolt security on at the end rather than build it in. Actually, in this case, they didn't even bolt it on. There was no security in terms of this particular feature. All organizations should build security in from the very, very, very beginning when you're thinking about building an application or building out your network environment. That's when you start thinking about security. And I'll talk about how that actually is more cost-effective while also being more effective. So anyone who's in software development is probably familiar with a graph that looks like this about resolving bugs. The idea being if you introduce a bug, or say in design, and you address it in design, it is substantially less expensive to fix it than if you address it in maintenance. So it's the exact same thing with security. So how do you build security in when you're actually building something? I just chose to articulate this using the waterfall methodology, but you can also do the same with some of the other methodologies, Agile and some others. You basically, at each step, you already have the right people in the room having the right conversations. You just need to ask a few more questions in order to effectively build security in. So when you're going through requirements, you're talking about, well, why are we even building this? What is the business need for this? You then talk about, well, if we're pursuing that need, let's build our threat model and figure out what assets this system is going to access. And then that, of course, determines who are the adversaries who will attack this system. Now we can get into design in order to defend against that type of adversary. So one of the other things that we wanted to look at was, well, we just suggested potentially for some organizations a lot more security. What are the financial ramifications of doing that? So it's actually less expensive to build security in than to bolt it on. And there are two areas of cost savings. So one is the actual security input effort itself. So in the case of what these numbers come from, I should back up a second, we aggregated and analyzed all our numbers from the last 10 years that we've been in business to determine what is the difference in terms of cost. And so that's what these anonymized numbers reflect. And so one cost savings is in terms of the assessment cost itself. So people who had us engaged along the way, helping them as they make small decisions, and we're helping them maintain security throughout, was about 10% less expensive than the people who built a product, deployed a product, and said, hey, we're already in the market. Can you secure us on this live system? It's okay, though. The other thing is it's never too late It's never too early to start working on your security. But the real cost savings comes in remediation. I showed you that hockey stick graph before. What we found was that in the case of applications that bolted security on, it was about 25 times more expensive to remediate the issues than if they had been addressed when they were introduced. And in the case of an infrastructure, the average was about 300 times more man-hours. But in some cases, it was impossible. A system had become so vast that you could actually not undo it. It would just be business cost prohibitive. So that pretty much sums up what I have here. The last piece to just sort of introduce is I mentioned the router problem, and it is a real problem that has not seen a resolution yet. We've since introduced 2 more pieces of research. We then turned it into So Hopelessly Broken, because that's what those devices are. It was the first ever router hacking contest at DEF CON, and we invited a whole bunch of security researchers to come and break routers with us. And we found even more zero-day vulnerabilities in that contest. It was hugely successful. We've then been invited to perform this contest at 5 contests since in the over 6 months it's been since August. And we're looking to do it again at DEF CON and beyond. So for any of you guys that are involved in security research or are interested in any this topic, we're going to be expanding it into hacking connected devices, Internet of Things. So I would invite any of you to come join, or we could even just distribute the results to you. But that's it. So I guess I'll pause for questions.
Today are not protected at all. They're running at root. They have all the mistakes which were present 20 years ago in the IT world are currently in the IoT, I would say. On the router are probably among the consumer devices, I don't speak about mobile phone and so on, are probably the one which has the best defended. Depending,
I guess in a relative sense.
Yes, I would challenge you on one point where you were speaking. All the routers you are using are routers you presented were routers which were used by that you could purchase on off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
If you are discussing with routers, if you try to attack some gateways, I would more call it gateways, which have been designed with the carrier itself, for instance, like in Europe. Here there is a different constraint because some carriers like O2, BT, France Telecom, Orange, and so on, are putting a very strong requirement on security.
I will leave it when I see it. We have our research hasn't gone that
We may
far.
have a discussion then.
Yeah. Hopefully you're right.
I don't say they are not penetrable.
Right.
And as you were saying, local attack is typically it's one of the things that it's very difficult to get these guys thinking about and local that. But at least from remote, you have many things.
Right. So there are a couple of really good things you brought up that I definitely want to touch on. So one, the fact that we're connecting devices without security even being considered. So I want to rename the contest from So Hopelessly Broken to Embedded Devices Internet of Things, because it sounds like idiot. That's what I really want to call it, because I think that anytime there's an evolution in technology, that'll be chapter 2. You've got the innovators. Someone creates someone, I don't know who the person is, but he's out there. Someone said, "What if I connect my door lock?" I've just now created a market, right? That guy's the innovator. Immediately behind that guy is this whole group of idiots who come in and say, "I'm going to now sell into this market," and then behind them, running as fast as they can, is people like me, the security guys trying to horse collar them, saying, "Hey guys, let's bring it back in. Let's protect our consumers."
IoT is for Internet of Threats.
The Internet of Threats, yeah. I know, that's good. And I forget what the other point was that you made that I wanted to address, but it was probably a good one. Yeah.
I was just going to talk about the carrier-specific security thing. So you're talking about like when you get a router from your internet provider, and that provides your Wi-Fi gateway.
Okay, depends.
Yeah.
It's very specific. I cannot speak. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to cheat,
No,
I
just
was
go-
working previously for a company like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so a European one.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say
A
the
French
problem is we're
one.
in the
I would
United.
even say a French one.
Yeah,
So
I was gonna say the problem is we're in the United States, and
in
here.
the United States, I know because we were as okay.
Yeah.
My hacking team was playing.
Yeah,
playing that.
and if I
But
just start
some people-
randomly looking
there
for
are some
IP
companies which
addresses,
are-
that
some companies are doing properly the job, but
Yeah.
most of them no. I agree on, but it's a question: who is ready to pay for?
Yeah.
Also, the question is Joe Sixpack. He doesn't care a shit about that because he doesn't understand.
Yeah.
And by the way, Joe Sixpack will not change the default password
what
to
about
get
the
access to his modem.
Is
What
Joe
about the
Sixpack
secret
a nickname
password that you
for
can't
the average
change?
American?
Yes, for me, yes. Sorry.
That's amazing. I'm gonna borrow that. Sorry, I think I spoke.
Oh, I was gonna say, what about the secret password that you don't know that you can't change? Randomly start going to IP addresses in Time Warner Cable and try technician Time Warner Cable. See what happens.
We agree, totally. A lot
to
of things.
just settle this debate, one of the routers in the study was Verizon Action Tech. So
Yeah, back to your Game of Thrones scenario and the black box, white box. So, how did you deal with the IPOAC issues? That would be the Internet Protocol over Avian Carrier. What happened to the carrier pigeon that sent the original message?
we killed him. Well, cool. Well, thanks, guys. I'll be here if you have any questions one-on-one.
I know, Brandon, every time.